All right.
Here we go. It's falling on my ear.
1 second. Hello and welcome back, everybody. This is F Normal, the Bold Life Gilladcast. And my guest this week is going to be an entertaining one. I can tell you that. I first came across Sarah Rose through Facebook connection. She was smart and sassy and bold and funny, and she is a sexual empowerment coach, which on its own is interesting. And her site is tantricactivation.com. Welcome, Sarah.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. You know, I loved your comments. They were smart, they were interesting, and we've become friends since then. How does one have one's tantric activated?
Great question. And it's something that I work on every single day. There's a lot of ways to go about having your Tantra activated. One way that in particular that is great is through breath work. I do a lot of breath work with my clients, and it's really effective at moving energy, clearing whatever is in there that wants to be cleared. So yeah, I usually start there.
You know, it's funny. I used to, when I first started doing, I don't know what you call it, transformational work, self-awareness work, growing up work, when people started to teach you how to breathe, I was like, fuck you, I know how to breathe. And another thing I really appreciated, the way you can instantly change your state with just a couple of breaths, focus breaths.
Yeah.
So maybe for those who think, fuck you, I know how to breathe, what's a practice someone can do to activate? Now, we call it Tantra. I don't know if everyone even knows what Tantra means. But Tantra is like the great yoking in some ways. My favorite definition is the great yes, they call it, out of Tibet, which is like yes to life, yes to sexuality, among everything else. But just yes to life instead of creating artificial heaven and earth divides or saying no to life. Is that a definition you use?
I haven't heard that, but I love that. Yes to life. And that's actually one thing that I say. It's like one of my mottos is say yes to life, say yes to love, say yes to pleasure, just say yes. So yeah, but I didn't realize that it came from that reference. So.
Hey, I guess you got the essence of it. So Tantra is, people in the West tend to confuse Tantra with what we call Neo-Tantra, which is mostly around sex. But Tantra is really a way of being across sort of all of life. Just before we get to the breath work, how might you're not really only a Tantra teacher though. You're a full sex, love, relationship coach.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. And what I work with people a lot around sexual empowerment, which means that if we have sexual trauma, if we have shame or guilt around our sexuality, then that holds us back from really being able to experience pleasure in our lives. So a lot of the work that I do with clients is first working with them to heal any trauma that they have had from sexual abuse,
right.
Things like that. And then we go a lot into the conditioning that we have, the stories that were placed on us by society or religion or family of origin, and go into those stories, see what's empowering, see what's limiting, and if it's limiting, then create new neural pathways to pleasure, replacing the ones that are there now.
It sounds like a good plan. I want to talk about some of those disempowering stories that we absorb, but first I want to get back to breath. Make sure we give everyone a simple practice they can use to wake up their pleasure, their ability to feel. I like to use the term to be a sensual connoisseur. To become a connoisseur of all this beautiful sensual apparatus that we have on our bodies, in our bodies. So what's a simple breath work for people who are listening?
Okay, so first what you want to do is open your mouth, gently allowing your jaw to relax, and inhale and exhale through an open mouth. So it's not like a big wide open, it's just really gentle. And keep the breath connected so that the inhale and the exhale are connected. There's no pause between the two. And so it's kind of like And depending on what you're specifically working on, the breath can go faster or slower. Mm-hmm. But the main thing is to keep it connected. And this is a great breath to use during sex and also during self-pleasure practices, because it gets you out of your cortex, the thinking part of your head that is the part that can often disconnect us from our bodies. And when that happens, it's hard to have orgasms, or it's hard to have control over ejaculation if you're a man. So that's a really important breath to have. And I usually recommend to clients that they do a couple minutes a day, first thing when they wake up, to just kind of get used to that breath pattern. So that way it's easier to drop into it during self-pleasure or sex.
So the key is to just keep the breath consistent without a pause. That's the practice.
Yes. Jaw relax is really important, especially for women, because the jaw is directly connected to the vagina. And so if their jaw is relaxed, then they'll be relaxed in the area of their vagina too, which helps with full body orgasms, because if we're contracted in that area, then the orgasm stays localized to that area of the body. But if it's relaxed, then the energy can begin to flow. You can begin to have orgasms throughout the whole body.
That's great. How is the jaw connected to the vagina?
I mean, any woman can just feel it. Like if they clench up their jaw, they're going to feel that their vagina clenches also. But if it's relaxed, then the vagina will stay relaxed as well.
Direct highway. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take your word on that one. I can do that. So like we'll get to all these practices. That's a great practice, by the way. I love that. The continuous breath is a beautiful one. And do you recommend a count? So for example, one practice for me is to keep my breath slow and steady. During sex, obviously breath can speed up really quickly. So do you recommend a count, like count of 3 in, count of 3 out, something like that, or 4 for that practice?
I don't typically, just because the counting then again engages the cortex and gets us in our head. So for men, when they're practicing on their own, I do recommend a count for that, just because it helps with the strengthening of their PC muscles, if they're, really focusing on how long they're holding for, that type of thing. But that's more for practicing on your own. If you're actually in sex, it's better just to be in the space, in the moment, and not
counting.
Yeah, because then that takes you out of presence, and presence is such an important part of Tantra.
That would be really bad. 1, 2, 3. What's next? Okay, 4. So what made a nice mommy of 2 turn into a sex goddess, teacher, maker, outer, enlightener?
All the things, right?
And how much do you get hit on at PTA meetings? That's the other thing.
I generally avoid those meetings.
Oh, because I can tell you, I mean, I've been through it, right? And I can tell you, all the frustrated dads. I remember back on PTA meetings, most dads were sexually frustrated. And the talk among the dads would be like, who's the hottest teacher? Oh, go check out room number, 84B. She's hot. Like, seriously, that's what the guys talked about. So.
That's what they talk about.
Gotta talk about something when, off season. Yeah. No, but I noticed it was really interesting. That's what the conversation was. I was single at the time, so that wasn't my issue. But I think that's why I was so aware of how deeply sexually frustrated from the dad's side. I'm sure from the mom's side as well. But seriously, how did you get here? Mom of 2 in Austin, suddenly sex empowerment teacher, out of the fashion industry. What happened?
It's actually funny. So I was in school at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, and I was right out of high school and starting there. And I needed a PE credit, so I took a yoga class. And
you couldn't stop orgasming.
And so,
great origin story.
Yeah, it started with yoga. And over the years, my personal development practice has evolved. I spent time in India doing white tantra training in Kundalini yoga with Gurmukh Karkhalsa. When I was there.
Wait, white tantra. Let's do definitions.
Okay, so white tantra is a non-sexual practice of tantra. And it's very, very powerful. It's a very yogic form of tantra. And tantra actually came out of India originally. So so there's a reason why it's really associated with yoga. Yoga is a part of Tantra. And so white Tantra is Tantra, but it's just a non-sexual part. And so I have a lot of training in that with one of the best teachers in the world. And while I was in India, I actually met my guru there. And I was introduced to him and became a part of his lineage, which is Tantra Kriya Yoga. And so that's really when I fell in love with Tantra and really began to fully understand like what it is. And it became a full practice for me in my entire life. But when I work with clients, I focus more on the sexuality part of it. And like you mentioned, that Neo-Tantra is, you know, something that we do here in the West. So while for me, my lifestyle is more of the classical Tantra, I feel like Neo-Tantra is really effective at helping people because our sexuality is such an important part of us. And it's really tantric to go into the taboo places in society. It's really tantric to, you know, see that we've got this huge taboo around sexuality and, you know, just be like, fuck that. Like, why? This is such an important part of life. And really go there with people. And, you know, for me, like I've chosen to really step out and be really vocal and be a leader in that. So that way it gives others permission to do the same in their lives.
To actually enjoy the body they were born into. Imagine that.
Right.
You know, I always say that that sexual repression, sexual shame is worse than racism. And racism ain't that good. Racism is taught to children. Obviously, they're not born with it. To hate other people, or sexual shame literally teaches you to hate your own body.
Yeah.
Which to me is just criminal, which is why I wanted to have you on here. We could go funny, but I want to ask you some serious questions.
Okay.
Because I was reading back through some of your work, and you talk about, you know, people look at you and they go, oh, she's like this free spirit. She went to India. She probably is like, has always been sexually free. But in your work, you talk about going through shame and guilt, and you mentioned sexual trauma. And, you know, I've been doing this work for 14 years. I am amazed. Is there anyone who doesn't have sexual trauma? I mean, certainly, you know, I was speaking to a parent the other day of a daughter, and he says, you know, it's amazing if you can get your daughter through elementary school without any sexual abuse or anything off color, and then junior high. Then you have to get them through high school. Then if they go to college, then young womanhood. And it really went deep for me. There's so many stages where women really can suffer various kinds of sexual trauma, abuse. I hate the word inappropriate because that doesn't mean anything. But let's say actions of lasting damage. And it strikes me, is there anyone who doesn't come out of early life without sexual trauma from the woman's side?
I mean, it's definitely very rare for that to happen. And even if there isn't necessarily trauma, as far as like somebody, you know, touching you inappropriately or saying something like that, there's also the conditioning that we have that's really traumatic as well, because it's like you said, it turns us against our own bodies. And that's really what it was for me. I had heavy religious conditioning.
Oh.
And so, yeah.
Sarah Rose for the loss. Catholic by any chance?
What's that?
Catholic by any chance? Or?
No, evangelical Christian. Yeah.
Oh, well.
And so for me, it was, while I always had a high sex drive, I felt desire in my body. I was attracted to lots of boys when I was in, you know, middle school, and it was exciting and it felt good. And, you know, I wanted to kiss and I wanted to be touched, and those things felt natural to me, but I had to shut that down. I had to, like, I wanted to dress cute and sexy, and I couldn't. Like, I had to be modest. I had to be appropriate. I couldn't have a boyfriend. Like, I was, you know, I was praised because I was sweet 16 and hadn't been kissed.
Oh.
And, yeah, you know, and so like all those things really shut me down because I was denying myself. I was denying this true nature, this true part of who I was. You know, no sex outside of marriage. All of that was really, really heavy. I mean, it's brainwashing was what it is. And so it took a lot for me to move through that and to create a new life of like, no, I'm going to be fully expressed in who I am. And my sexuality is something I'm going to own. And really go out there in the world and be like, hey, this is who I am.
That's awesome.
And, you know, so many women have similar stories, and they just look at me and they're like, thank you for doing what you do, because it helps them be able to do it in their own lives in their own way.
So this is called the Bold Life Gilad-cast. What was your first like bold move out of that? You know, by the way, I've heard that expression, sweet 16, never been kissed. I never thought about it. I never realized. You just said that. I'm like, wow, that's actually a thing. I've never thought about what that actually meant. Tragic. What was your first big, bold move out of that world?
Well, when I moved to New York and I was working in the fashion industry, that really opened my mind, obviously. So I always say, like, I was raised in Arizona, but I grew up in New York, and I grew up really fast there. But it was really conflicting for me because of the brainwashing that I had, the conditioning of like everything had to be this way, but then the desires in my body being different and seeing all these people living different lifestyles. It was a challenge, and it took me a long time to really break through it. But actually what happened for me, when my daughter was born, my second child, I almost died. And in that experience, I had such profound peace. And for me, there was no hell, there was no heaven. Like, I wasn't in the seat of judgment at that point in my life. It was just like, there was nothingness, there was peace. And I came back from that experience completely free of all of that I had held on to before, that I was really fighting with and struggling with internally. And I was able to finally really just let go, and it doesn't exist. Like, at least not for me.
So you teach, so if people want sexual empowerment, they should almost die.
They should almost die.
So your workshops, what exactly happens now? Okay, so, well, there's a story there. Was that after the birth? Was it involved with the birth? Or?
It was after the birth. She was fine now.
Okay. Yeah. So you had this experience. You actually kind of had a samadhi or enlightenment experience where you realized heaven and hell was bullshit, if we can say, you know, the division of, you know, connected. I like to use the term connectedness and disconnectedness as heaven and hell. That's really all it is. It's just idealized, you know, into, you know, you're either connected to the pleasure of all that is, right, and the reality of all that is, or you're disconnected. That's kind of hell to me. Yeah. So in that moment you broke, that was it, and never turned back. Did you experience guilt or shame? Like, how did your life change? What happened?
Yeah, so there were definitely still the patterns that I had there, but I really chose to move through them. After that, pretty soon after that was when I went to India and began my really intensive training there. But I continually challenge myself every single day. Like, I put myself through the fire. If some sort of resistance comes up in me, like, I go head on into it. And so I don't have very much anymore. Actually, last year I started teaching a new course, and it was a 100-day course that started at the beginning of 2017. And the first day of class, my co-teacher said something to me, and I got really triggered in front of the class because I felt like what he said, people in the class were going to think that I was a slut because of it. And he wasn't meaning it in a derogatory way at all. He was not intending it to be that way. He was just talking about me as I am, which a lot of people may say I'm a slut. But I got triggered in that moment, and I dedicated that 100 days to every single day doing one thing that scared me sexually, because I was determined to get past that conditioning that I had. And it really did, it cleared a lot for me. Stuff still comes up from time to time, but I don't allow it to stay. I just keep moving through it.
That's awesome. Wait, so that 100 days, was that an assignment for your students, or that was just for yourself?
That was just for me.
So would you mind sharing some of those? I'm sure everyone is fascinated.
Oh,
like there are actually 100 things. I mean, there are only so many holes, you know.
No, well, I'm not talking about like sex, like actually having sex in certain ways, but different things around sexuality that might be taboo. So, you know, like I had my first hookup with a complete stranger that I met online during that time. And, you know, so there's things like that, which I hadn't done before, or, what else did I do? Like, trying to think of some juicy ones to tell you.
99 to go, you know.
I know, it's been so long now that I don't remember everything. I started doing some BDSM during that time. Sorry, I'm pulling a blank for that.
One day for B, one day for D, one day for S. That's 4 more. We're down to 95, so we have time, you know.
We have time.
No, I'm just kidding. Well, let me ask another question. When you work with people, what are some of the most common withholds or obstacles people have to just simply enjoying the pleasure of being in a body, you know?
Yeah, and a lot of it comes from the patriarchal conditioning that we have. We've just been taught for generations, for thousands and thousands of years, that it's not okay, that it's bad. And so that goes really deep, really deep.
Yeah. So what are you like? What are some, without obviously sharing names, addresses, Facebook pages, some of the people you've worked with? You know, I'm just curious. I'm sure everyone, you know, one of the great points that Brene Brown makes in her work on shame is that, you know, shame, when you bring it out in the open and share your story, you realize you're not alone. There are so many people out there who share your secret shame. So what are some, I'm just curious, what are some of the stories or belief systems or histories that people have had to overcome, obviously without sharing, you know, personal details?
Yeah, fantasies come up quite a bit. There's actually a lot of people fantasize about sexual experiences with children, and there's a lot of shame that they have around that, which usually comes from feeling like there's some sort of loss of innocence that they have themselves, and there's the underlying part of that is usually that they can reclaim that through, you know, being with an innocent. So, you know, we can work with helping them to reclaim their innocence in other ways.
Let's stick with that. That's just really interesting. You caught me off guard with that one. I was ready for sort of, you know, more sympathetic sort of fantasies, adult. So that's really took me aside here. How do you do that for someone? How do you reintroduce them to their innocence or rehabituate them to innocence?
There's a process that I lead them through where they can actually go through embodying themselves being a baby again, and live that experience and be able to be sexual in the state of being a baby, and because that's actually really normal. Like even in utero, babies are seen pleasuring themselves. They masturbate inside the womb, so it's really normal. But then
nobody can see, that's why. I feel those damn sonograms. Like,
yeah. But then they come out, you know, and if they touch themselves, their hands get slapped away, or, you know, the adult looks at them with disgust or horror, and it starts from that age, you know. And so I lead them through that process, and then the same thing in early childhood and adolescence, and so they're able to go through all the different stages of their lives and experience innocence in their sexuality, pleasure in their sexuality, and just be able to have that for themselves.
Very interesting. So they're kind of cut off from that innocent pleasure that everyone experiences as a baby. I mean, there's probably nothing more pleasurable than a baby sucking on a breast. I mean, if you ever want to see pure pleasure, that face. Oh my God. So, okay, so that's one that comes up. That's very interesting. You kind of, like I said, caught me off guard. Is that a common thing?
It is. It's very common.
Okay. What are some of the other either fantasies or shame issues that come up commonly?
So let's see. Fantasies. There's a lot of shame, women in particular, just about being sexual, and they have a hard time being sexual in their partnerships, in their relationships, because of it. They feel like they're expected to be able to orgasm, but at the same time, like, they feel like there's something wrong with orgasming or even desiring to have that, just because there's so much confliction within their brain and body. So we do a lot of work around that as well. So many relationships are suffering because of that, like being taught from an early age, this is wrong, sex is dirty, sex is bad, don't touch yourself, don't touch others, blah, blah, blah. And then we get into a relationship, and then suddenly we're supposed to be sexual and orgasmic and intimate and connected with people. And it's like, but we have no training. All of our programming is told us that's wrong. So it's like completely doing a overhaul of all of that and creating these new neural pathways in the brain so we can be pleasurable.
Right. And I guess that has to be done. That doesn't have to be done. It seems like, so your work would be to get people privately with themselves just to get comfortable with their bodies again so they can share it.
Yeah, a lot of the work starts on our own first. I definitely feel like it's easier to practice these things on our own and then take them into sexual relationships with other people.
Kind of like taking free throws in basketball and then playing a game. I mean, you're more confident going into the game if you know you can hit it.
Absolutely. Yeah, right. Definitely.
Can we talk orgasms for a second?
Always.
I have a little pet peeve around orgasms. Not them in particular, but I find that a lot of the popular sort of talk about sex almost makes orgasm a cult. It makes it almost like this cultic, magical goal. And the more I know about anything, the more I appreciate presence and process rather than setting goals in life. I mean, have a goal, but focus on the presence and process.
Yeah.
What's your feeling about that in terms of the, how people think of orgasms? How does this, first of all, do you agree? Do you think that there's a popular focus on orgasm that takes us away from, well, especially women, because orgasm is pretty easy for most guys, I would imagine, that it kind of takes you out of your sexuality, this focus on goal setting and orgasm and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. Like I was saying, practicing on your own does make it easier to do with somebody else. And so I do recommend that for women, because I think it's normal to desire orgasm. Like, orgasm feels amazing. It's something that, like,
my favorite gasm. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, why would we not want it? But our brain is our biggest sex organ, and so if we have all this stuff going on in our head about, oh, I've got to orgasm, or if, something's wrong with me if I don't orgasm, I've got to orgasm faster, I have to orgasm in this way, blah, 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 then it's going to be a lot harder to orgasm, and you're just going to be fighting yourself with it. And I think another thing is also realizing that everybody's orgasm is going to look different and feel different. And the studies on orgasm have been mostly based off of the model of the male orgasm. And so what a woman experiences is going to be very different. And the way she experiences is going to be different from every woman. And so, like, if we're only focusing on the peak orgasm, that like climax type orgasm, that's the type of orgasm that is typically associated, like if you're having a clitoral orgasm, and that's very similar to a male orgasm with his ejaculatory orgasm that a man has. But that's not the only type of orgasm that we have. Like, we have cervical orgasms and G-spot orgasms and breast orgasms. You can have toe orgasms, like full body, rolling waves, just bursts of energy. It can feel like fire in your body. And there's so many different ways that it can be experienced. And You know, exactly like you said, presence, being in the moment, experiencing it all, because it's all really pleasurable, is where the yumminess is.
Yes, I agree. What do you want men most to know about women and the orgasm or sexuality, or was that it? You ride the waves.
Ride the waves, just slow down. I think that's the main thing, is I work a lot with guys on helping them control their penis, be the master of their cock. Like, they can do it. It's possible. So that way, you know, because so many times I've been with men and like they get to that point where it's just like a runaway train and they're just like fully focused on getting to the moment of ejaculation, and they like get in that space and they can't get out of it. It's literally like out of control at that point. And so being able to master it.
And what do you want women, based on your experience, to know about men that they might not know?
Men really want to be amazing lovers. They really want to please you, and they really do have that desire. And so talking to them, I think, is really helpful, and letting them know what makes you feel good, what you really want, and how they can please you.
Yeah, there's a game I recommend in some of my work where the woman is only allowed to give a number from 1 to 10 on the pleasure scale, no commentary, and the man does what the man does to her, with her, and she just gives feedback on the level of pleasure. It's a very fun game to play because it's very surprising, I think, for a lot of men and a lot of women. So it's just a constant feedback. You said talk to your guy, let him know what feels good, encourage him.
Yeah.
I once had a lover I referred to as like playing the game of Operation, which didn't work. If you remember that game where you touch the wrong spot and it's like, that's not good. That's not
we don't want that. We don't want that.
Encouraging.
No.
So, you know, men tend to respond, for better for worse, around sexuality from women with positive encouragement. So for the ladies listening. And for men, how to communicate what they want to women. What recommendations do you have?
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit there.
Sorry. For men, you know, we talked about men wanting to be great lovers with women, but for men, what can they communicate to women about what they want, other than, like you said, the runaway train? There's so much more pleasure that doesn't actually involve orgasm at all. What do you recommend for men to communicate to women? And do you find that men are ashamed to talk about wanting pleasure?
They are. I think it's actually a lot harder for men than it is for women, because we have this idea that, you know, men are the sexual superiors, that they're the ones that in the bedroom, they're supposed to know it all and take care of everything. And so it's actually a lot harder for men to talk about it than it is for women. But I think, you know,
sorry about that.
Bless you.
Orgasm.
So yeah, just it's time for men to be able to be vulnerable as well as women. So we're going through a sexual revolution right now, and this is not just about women, it's also about men. And on my Instagram, when men will comment publicly and ask me questions, I'm so encouraging to them, because I know how much that takes, how much courage it takes for them to actually post these things publicly, these questions that they have, the struggles that they have. And I really appreciate that, because I really know how hard that is.
What's your Instagram?
It's at Sarah Rose Tantra. Sarah has 2 R's, SARRAH.
Rose Tantra, Sarah Rose Tantra.
Sarah Rose Tantra, yeah.
And I think I know, because I've worked with men and women for about 14 years now. What a relief it is for men. When I do men's workshops, I always bring in women who I consider evolved and open and truthful, and it's like this huge wave of relief. Men are so eager just to ask questions. We have Q&A panels where anything goes. And just there's such a huge relief when they find a woman like yourself who's comfortable with her sexuality, so they can actually finally ask the things that they don't have a chance to ask maybe in their own personal lives or with anybody in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I encourage both sexes to do their part, because when it comes to being able to have pleasure in bed for a woman, like a woman needs to also do her part and train her body how to orgasm, so that she knows what turns her on and what brings her pleasure. And she's done the work to, release the conditioning or heal the trauma, all of those types of things, because there's a lot of being said out there about, like that men are not good lovers because of, premature ejaculation and things like that. And I'm not saying that that's not true, because those things are very true. And that's why I work with men around a lot of that. But it is both parts. We all need to do our part.
Yes. You raised something interesting. I just had a thought. You said you experimented in your 100 days with BDSM, and one of the things that I find really interesting is that I really like Chinese food, right? I don't want Chinese food every night. We have no problem with going to test Vietnamese, French food, Italian food, Mongolian food, Ethiopian food. It's normal, right? To use my favorite word, but it's encouraged, and you don't give it a second thought. Yeah, I'm going to try different kinds of food and see what I like best. But we don't have that with sexuality, right? For example, so years ago, I met a woman at a writing group, and she kind of looked like you, and she was young, and I said, "So what do you write about?" And she goes, "Well, I'm one of the highest paid dominatrices in Los Angeles." And I'm like, "No shit." She was like, "Yeah," because she was really interesting. She was a graduate student in literature, and we talked about how she kind of got into it. And she said, "Do you want to come to a club?" And so I was newly divorced. I was like, "Sure, I'll go anywhere." And for me, it was like going to a Star Trek convention. It had like zero sexual charge for me for whatever reason.
Okay.
But I was like totally open. Like, let's see what this is, and there's people in leather and women in cages, and I don't know. It just didn't have an impact. But I was open to sort of see what else is out there. What could people do who are, using the restaurant metaphor and in the work you've done with people, like what can people do to open up their mind, first of all, and open up their experiences to see what they actually like?
Well, there's tons of workshops out there and different things you can go to, exactly like you said, for BDSM, or there's things for kink or tantra. There's oming. There's all sorts of different things. And I think it's just experimenting. You can go online, check things out. But finding a good teacher is really the most important thing, because there's a lot of people out there that are selling things, but they're not very well trained. And so, you're not going to get the best experience. So definitely do your homework and work with somebody that has good training.
I'm really glad I asked that question. That's actually a great answer, because, sometimes you just need guidance through these things.
Mm-hmm.
You can have an experience but not really be able to process it because it's something so new or maybe threatening to your inherited idea of normalcy.
Yeah.
I think that's a great answer. I think finding a good teacher in this realm is really important.
It is. I mean, and I keep studying all the time. I just completed a 2-year training, and I'm already signed up for another one that I'm going to start in 2019. And, I've got other trainings that I'm doing between now and then. Like, it never ends. And so there are some really, really fantastic teachers out there.
No, I agree. I also agree on continual training. I just signed up for something yesterday, Radical Honesty Workshop. I love Brad Blanton. He's been on the podcast. I've never actually done one of his workshops, so that was just yesterday. Yeah, constant opening, constant learning. I guess a last question I have is, I'm fascinated. You're in Austin, Texas, which is really just Austin. It's not really Texas.
It's not.
No, it really isn't. Especially around kids. So, how do you talk about sexuality? You have a 7, 11-year-old. I don't know if you're okay talking about this, but you're a teacher, and I think people have kids. So how do you handle that whole subject with as a parent?
I think that it's important to treat sex as something that's normal and something that is an exciting thing to look forward to, you know, when they're at an appropriate age for it. And, you know, like whatever level, whatever age that kids are at, they're going to have different questions. And just, you know, whenever they bring something up, just address it on their level in a way that's just very matter of fact and normal and not like it's a big deal, and
Right.
you know, and move on. And then they'll come back and then they'll have more questions later at a different age.
Oh, yes.
Answer at another time. And
Yes.
but just allowing it to be just like a normal conversation.
Yes.
It makes it a normal thing for them, but it also helps them to be able to trust you, that they can come to you about things that are important and that they're not going to be judged and they don't have to hide it from you.
No, I'm smiling because I'm just suddenly had all these memories of my kids. And so I remember him asking my older son, he was young, 6 or so, 6, 7. He's like, you know, Bubba, he goes, why are people so weird about sex? Right? And I said, well, and this was my answer. I hope it's a good one. I said, well, sexuality, it's kind of an irrational thing. You feel really strongly. And so it doesn't fit in with a lot of the rest of life where people are working or communicating or good neighbors because it's very reasonable. And that sort of worked for a while. That seemed like a good answer. And then I was just laughing because when he was 8, we were driving home. I remember the exact spot down here at PCH. And he's like, he was looking, I could see he was focused, and he goes, Bubba? I go, what? He goes, it's disgusting, isn't it? I'm like, what? And he goes, you know. And I go, no, what? He goes, you know. And I go, no, I don't. What? What's disgusting? He goes, you know, sex. And I'm like, oh, now's the time, huh? 8 years old. So I go, well, what do you think's disgusting about it? He goes, you know. And I go, no, what? And he goes, you know, you have to put your thing in her thing. So I said, well, I don't know if that's disgusting. And he goes, I go, I don't know if it's that disgusting. And I was trying to think of what to say because I was really kind of caught off guard. He's 8. And there was a long silence, and I was kind of thinking what to say. And he goes, Baba? And I go, what? He goes, is it cold? That's what he was worried about.
Oh.
And I said, well, sometimes, no. But yeah, and then what I told him was that sex was basically if you took a whole day of eating fudge and chocolate and ice cream and cookies and pie and compressed it into an hour. I go, that's sex. And that kept him quiet the rest of the way home. I wanted him to know it was fattening. No, I wanted him to know it was pleasurable. Like it's a pleasurable thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
That opened the door. And we were able right into his teens, Hey, Dad, are you into the butt sex? I remember that one. That was a fun one with all his friends there. So, yeah, that was a great one. That was really funny. So, Dad, just out of nowhere, I graduated from Baba to Dad. The butt sex, Dad?
Butt sex. Nice.
Which
is a very hot topic today in today's world. I mean, anal sex is the number one topic of conversation of all the messages I get.
Why do you suppose?
Because it may be our last real taboo of sexuality. I mean, I hate to say, hopefully maybe something else will come up, but anything that has been that isn't directly related to procreation has been taboo. It's been shamed. We've been taught that it's sinful to have oral sex, to have anal sex, to take birth control, to masturbate, and so I think while there's been less stigma around some of these other things just because people have been doing it, the anal sex, because it's also been associated with homosexuality, has kind of stayed in that taboo space. But it feels good. People want to do it, it's like, and so, yeah.
It doesn't mean you're gay, guys.
No, it does not mean you're gay.
It's just pleasure. So I love it. So you and I are very aligned along the lines of getting to know the pleasure of being in a body. It's really not that complicated, I think. I didn't grow up with a culture that you grew up with. So I didn't grow up with that kind of shame and taboo, I think, in a lot of ways. But in teaching, especially Southern Baptists, they're always the ones at my workshops who come with the huge shame. And again, I personally just feel like it's criminal to feel ashamed about this body you're in. I mean, how wonderful to have a body for a moment. Okay. Any last words of wisdom for people?
Feels good. Might as well enjoy it.
As long as you're not hurting anybody. Right?
Exactly.
And it's legal. And it's legal.
It's legal. It's free most of the time.
Most of the time. I don't know if it's ever actually free. But no, as long as you keep it legal and as long as there's consent. We haven't even touched consent. Can we, let's take a couple of minutes. I'm looking at the clock, but it's obviously a really important subject. What's your take on what's going on around consent, and what do you recommend?
Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation that's happening, that's long overdue. So I'm really glad about it. I think that there's a dark side to what's happening, though, and it is that people are in some ways becoming even more afraid of their sexuality because of it. There's a lot of men that are really afraid to be sexual now because they feel like any type of any showing of their sexuality could get them targeted. And so I feel like that's a shame because what that's doing is it's further repressing our sexuality. And repression of sexuality is what has gotten us here in the first place. If we were able to just really be in the bliss of our sexuality, we wouldn't have this twisted, distorted sexuality that we have that's created this whole Me Too movement that's going on. So I think it's important to see both sides of it. There's a lot of deep healing work that needs to be done so that way women can not be so triggered by things that men do, which may not necessarily be something that's aggression towards them. It may just be a natural form of their expression of their sexuality. And so if we're in a space of being triggered, then little things are going to trigger us, and so I think we're seeing a lot of that also. So while I'm glad the conversation is happening, it really, for me, comes down to we all need to heal. And that healing is the most important thing, so that way we can move into a next space of being able to experience pleasure around sex again.
True. Let's just drill down on this because it's really important. When you say we all need to heal, what are some actual steps men and women who are listening can take?
So with my clients, I use a lot of techniques that Peter Levine has come up with, or it's somatic experiencing, and he actually developed it for people with PTSD. And what these do is they go into the primal brain where trauma is stored, and help to release it, and be able to release it from the body. So if we've experienced type trauma, it usually gets stuck if we're not able to release it properly. So there's steps that I take people through that actually help remove it from the brain and from the body. It's definitely something you need to work with a trained professional in, though.
So that's interior healing.
Yeah.
What about interpersonally between men and women?
I think it starts with us, though. All starts with us as individuals first and foremost. Because if we don't have that healing done within ourselves, then I don't even know how we can begin to heal with other people. Excellent answer once again. Sarah Rose, tantricactivation.com. Tantricactivation.com is where my online women's course is. It's a 7-week course that guides women through this whole process. I also do private coaching through my other website, which is sarahrose.com. So online course is at Tantric Activation, private coaching through Sarah Rose. Double R, Sarah. Your parents did that to you just to make it difficult, no doubt. Well, no, actually they did that so it'd be easier for me to get a domain name. They knew that could be really challenging in the future. Just kidding.
Are they psychic or are you 15?
Just kidding.
All right, that's great. So it's sarahrose.com. And your Instagram, which is terrific, I follow it, is Sarah.
It's Sarah Rose Tantra.
Sarah Rose Tantra. Beautiful. Sarah Rose, thank you so much. Anyone who wants to get in touch with her, obviously, she's a great teacher, hugely grounded, lighthearted, deeply trained. And what I just love about you is that you're so natural and upfront and unweird about everything. And I think you make sexuality relationship easier and happier. So
well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's my goal. I'm glad to hear I'm doing well.
I'll see you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.